All right, welcome back to the Central Connection. Here with Danny Sprank, our third ward council person,
Hey.
as well as all around amazing Dubuquer. He'll fix your roof. He'll give you some guidance in the city and what's going on.
Yeah.
And I forgot what is your degree in?
So it's it's business management, and I got that from UD many moons ago in 2011 from their life program.
Yeah.
Their student life program, which was
UD
fun.
grad in the house. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. So just all around exciting. Danny and I have connected over the years through actually business, through running, with Geezy Roofing and just different commercial projects, and then got to know each other just in community events and more fused and connected now that we own property in the North End and been an amazing resource and somebody just to look to for the light of what's happening on the North End. Yeah. So exciting pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
To get to know you, to share with other people more about who you are and what you're up to.
Well, I grew up on a farm, so I'm used to, I grew up, stars, no noise.
Bellevue.
South of Bellevue, actually, on the little road, on the road to Preston.
Oh, wow.
So, but I was used to that type of like quietness of, we had dairy, so you heard animals, but it was nothing like, ambulances, cars, And so the first years when I moved into town, it did take me a little while to adjust, but I don't mind it. I'm used to it. It doesn't bug me really.
Yep.
To me, it's a sense of like there is something going on. It's like living across from the park. It's always, and because you mentioned getting up early, I get up at 5 most days. So I go to bed at like 9-ish when I can, 9:30-ish at the very latest. And so we have our windows open. There's the noises of the park. It's like there's a community, there's a people, and that's what I love about our city is.
That becomes comforting to some people.
It does. It becomes a routine. Like it doesn't bug me when I hear the train horns sometimes going on, and even though we're nowhere near a train, but they're all down.
I have a friend that lived in New York City, and actually, Enoch was just telling the same story too. Enoch was just on the podcast, and he said when he came here from, he was in the Bronx, or where was he at? He was in New York, Bronx, yeah. And he came to Emmaus Bible College, and he said when he got here, he like was freaking out,
it was too
anxiety because it was like too quiet. But I have another friend that like had played on their Alexa like sounds of the city at night because they needed to hear like sirens and honking and different things, or because they lived in a small town and it was like, I can't do this.
And I can't.
There's a comfort to it.
And I'm not saying that's all the time either. It's just
you play cows or something. Or
no. It doesn't bug me any. It's part of where we live, and I'm used to it. It doesn't disturb me. When you talk about ebbs and flows. The neighborhood there's a lot of older folks in it, and they're not used to the changes that have happened. Some of them have adapted and some of them haven't, and they basically don't like the noise. I also look back at the history of Dubuque when the 70s, when things went sideways, as I like to say it, and everybody left town.
For anyone that's not from Dubuque that's maybe potentially tuning into this, walk us through that. What does that mean?
So what happened in the late 70s, mid to late 70s, essentially we lost industry. John Deere closed a good section of the workforce. Things decreased. A lot of people left town. 20-ish% left the community.
Wow.
And it took nearly 25 years to regrow our population. So our community was built out for like 90-some thousand people, and then it shrunk a lot, and it took forever to rebuild it. So people weren't used to having the density of population. And now that we're getting back to that, there are people who don't like that. And it doesn't bug me that we have that density, because density is good sometimes when we need a variety of voices coming to the table about issues.
I guess we got kind of a format here, and I think we should I'll get back into it. You and I could just go
for it. Yeah, I know, right? ADD.
So
Squirrel.
Tell me your roots of so you grew up on a dairy farm south of Bellevue. Walk me back to that.
Early
life.
Early, in the far long time ago, before the internet, not quite that old. So my folks were farmers, and they still are. they decided as we got older, like junior high-ish, to expand our dairy operation. We went from 35 dairy cows to over 200 dairy cows.
Oh, wow.
And I can still to this day remember the 3 semis that showed up bringing all these cattle to our farm. And they didn't know who we were. We didn't know who they were. So we all met we all got to, work with them for months till they realized our system and everything, because they had come from a couple of other farms. And that was a major expansion for us, where my folks had a couple of other pieces of property as well. And as we all got older, we realized milking cows is nice, but it's what I called the work camp. It's twice a day. It's in the morning and it's in the night. My parents were very fortunate. They always wanted us to keep good grades in school, so they didn't make us do chores early in the morning. I had second cousins and first cousins that had to do farming in the morning, but we did not have to. But we had the evening stuff. So that basically got you on me in this regiment of a schedule, like 4 o'clock. We're going to go start milking cows. And then it's from 4 to 8:30 at night. So that's every day of the week. So you always had to be home at a certain time to milk cows, because they're waiting for you.
Interesting.
So and I enjoyed working with the cattle. I really do. They have their own unique personalities, but it's just, I didn't want to do this forever. So that's when I left.
I've heard of all the farming. Mm-hmm. The dairy industry can be one of the most difficult and hardest to make a buck in too, but just really challenging and hardworking.
It really is, because your whole livelihood is based on the price per pound of your milk, and a gallon of milk weighs about 8-ish pounds, I think, if I remember correctly. And so that's so much per pound, and there's only one person in town that we're all selling to, and it's Prairie Farms, and there's nothing against Prairie Farms at all, but they're a market, and it's all market based, and you always kind of felt like you were getting screwed a lot. You did all this work, and price of milk always sucked. The pound price always sucked. But you made do with what you could. But my 2 older brothers didn't really want to do it. One went in to become a vet. One just decided to do other stuff. And then my little sister didn't want to do it either. So my folks realized, well, why are we keeping all these cattle? And they downsized their operation considerably. And they got rid of all their cattle. And then they decided to do over-the-road trucking.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. You have to.
At what age were you?
Well, I would have been like 20, 21. So I was already moving out of the house, off the farm.
So they bought a semi and just started to drive
decided
around.
to be a team driving. Like, Mom drove and Dad drove. Dad always had a CDL for farm stuff anyways, and for other stuff. And so Mom got a CDL. And it's like, okay, have fun. And like I said, you have to really love your spouse. Like, really love your spouse to be stuck with them in a confined space for like up to 5 days.
Wow, you really get to know somebody.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So that's that. And then I decided to come up to town, up to Dubuque, and just kind of worked different places. I worked retail for a little while, the wonderful world of Walmart.
Oh wow.
Yeah, that was fun. And I really wanted to go back to school. I kind of muddled through my associate's degree, took a break for a few years, and then went back in like 08, 09-ish, finished that up. But then once I was graduating and through with Walmart, I had gone from like a cashier to working in the deli departments to being a department manager of basically the impulse and what was it? It was over at Galena. This was like almost 20 years ago. Not quite. Impulse items, cigarettes, and cigarettes and candies. I was gonna say liquor, but no, I didn't have liquor. So it's the oddest thing to run around the store all day, filling all the candy and like.
I love that they nail it. It's like right on the nose. They call it the impulse items.
Yeah.
Know?
So like all that stuff that you want to grab right by the register. That was like my whole department over at Galena.
You were a drug dealer.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, there were cigarettes in there. Yeah.
Candy, sugar.
Yeah. I was getting them when they were young and when they were 18, right? But I wanted to go back to school full time or more part time again. To get like a bachelor's degree in something. Yep. I didn't know what. The problem was Walmart wouldn't give me a fixed schedule, and I was really disappointed with that. Like, it's like I'm willing to work every weekend if you'll give me a Tuesday and a Thursday or a Wednesday and a Monday, then I can go to school.
So you could do a split.
Yeah. Do both again, like I had been kind of doing at nights, and they didn't want to do that. So, and this was prior to just as those online colleges were kind of coming about, and nobody was like, well, that's not a real school.
Right.
So I probably, looking back, probably could have done something through one of those, but nobody knew what those were. And I'm the type of person where I actually need to be in a physical classroom.
Yep.
I know myself that much. To do an online class would not end.
The discipline is not there.
Not in my early 20s. My early 20s would have been horrible. What
was driving? Like, what was making you feel like you had to get this bachelor's degree?
Kind of just I didn't think that retail was where I wanted to work forever, and I kind of wanted to do something with business, something bigger than myself eventually at some point. I just didn't know what at like 21, 22. And I thought, well, that's this path to success. That's what our generation was also told.
Yep.
Because I graduated from a class with 34 people in it. 33 people. And I think myself and 2 other people didn't ever go to college. We kind of worked through college a little differently, but everybody else was like, you have to go to a 4-year university. You have to put yourself in a massive amount of debt. And looking back, I'm glad I didn't, because I still have friends that are, we're all approaching our 40s that are just finally paying off their life and getting caught back up with reality. So, but I thought that was what we were told to do.
So where were you working when you went to the UD Life program?
So at that point I had just left Walmart, and I got involved with the Giese companies. They were with Giese Roofing.
Okay.
A friend of mine there was like, hey, they're looking for this entry-level office position. I'm like, okay, I don't know anything about construction at all. I know geometry. I was really good at geometry. I liked geometry. So I thought, well, that'd be useful. And my boss was like, well, I need a guy who can write letters, take phone calls, help us with all this stuff. I was like, okay.
Perfect.
So he hired me on. Big leap of faith, not knowing what I knew.
Who was that?
So that's Dan Lightfried, and he's still there. He's been in the company going 30-ish years himself, so he'll be retiring. And this was like 2006-ish time frame. Yeah. And that's where I've been since, but I've worked my way progressively up the company since. And so that gave me a stable 8 to 5 job, even though it's 7 to 3:30 in the afternoon. So that gave me a stable job where it's like, okay, now I can go back to school at nights.
So you're like double majoring. You're learning roofing, which is a whole understanding. Like you're learning all of that and the office and clerical end of a company. To going to school to learn business management, which actually would apply right back to what you're already doing.
So
what an amazing opportunity.
It was, and it was able to help me figure out stuff, because basically Giese Roofing was always a part of the Giese Sheet Metal division, but they were non-union, so they were breaking away. So they needed to create their own office structure, their own processes. So that was what a lot of it was. It was the first couple of years was just helping figure out how we want to properly do invoicing, job setup, paperwork for submittals, letters, all this stuff that a fresh company was really kind of figuring out. We had a lot of help though from our parent companies or sister companies. We never quite figured out how to explain the other companies.
Who are the owners? So it's Tom, and Charlie?
and Charlie, yeah.
Okay, got it. Great guys. And mentors in my eyes as far as people who they've got it together. And then who's Jim Giese Roofing? That's a different company.
He's totally different.
No family relations?
Well,
they're not the same.
To Charlie Giese. So they're brothers actually.
Oh.
So I guess backing up a little to how the whole Giese hierarchy works. And
just
sorry, I talk a lot with my hands.
Small town talk. That's fine.
Yeah. So the Giese started over 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And how they started was there was 3 brothers at one time. So this would have been Charlie and Jim and Tom's dads.
Okay.
All started. And then there was, so those 2 brothers, and then the third brother, none of his children wanted to be involved with the companies. So they kind of faded out, but they're still involved in the community with things. Jim, I think about 30-ish years ago, the story that I was told was Jim approached his dad and his uncles to say, hey, I want to expand this roofing thing. And they're like, I don't think that's a good idea. So he kind of said, okay. And then about a year later, he's like, well, I'm going to break away and go do my own thing. And that's how he started his company. And Tom and Charlie stayed on with their dads and their uncles, and they kind of expanded from sheet metal. And then they added on manufacturing, and then roofing got its breakaway, and then there was lighting division, and now there's our paint line division.
Yeah.
So we're up to over 150 people total between all these companies.
I mean, just that name, that family name alone carries a lot of weight in this town, as far as being employers, being the huge, philanthropists in town.
Oh, yeah.
They give a lot to different charities and different organizations. So they all came from that same root,
And they actually all came from the North End.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I've talked to a number of seniors that have as I was door knocking and talking to people, and we'd talk. They'd ask me about what I do for work, and I would explain who I worked for, and they would have fond memories of the family of Giese Sheet Metal. I believe it was Joe. He kind of did a unique thing. You almost bought a furnace on layaway. When they first started going into more residential HVAC divisions, they sold people the furnace, and then you paid them back on a payment system. Now that was a long time ago. This was like 50 years ago, when people were more honest and you could trust folks for doing that. And so it's an interesting legacy that's what they did in our community.
You need the heat.
Yeah.
And if credit wasn't like it is today,
banks,
you'd have to help people get this done.
And so that's what they did, is he basically loaned them the money to pay for their furnace, and then they would, pay it back. So it was an interesting legacy. One time I knocked on the door of the family that I think it's on the corner of Shiras is one of the Giese family houses. It's kind of this Frank Lloyd,
an architectural type.
Yeah,
home.
it's a pretty architectural home. It's nothing fancy, but it's got unique character with clay tile on it. I think it's on the corner of, like I said, I think Shiras and Lincoln.
Yeah.
So
So this company, you get going back to your roots. So you get involved there. You're going to school at UD, which is awesome. Take us from there.
So continue on with Giese. Eventually graduated from UD. I was the second to sign up and the second to graduate in their 2-year window. Sorry, didn't think I'd be that thirsty this morning.
It's good.
So got done with there and stayed on with Giese's. Worked my way up from being basically an office person to a project coordinator, and then eventually to a project manager / estimator, which I've been doing that for over 11 years now.
Wow.
Yeah. But because of Giese's, I wanted to buy a home in the neighborhood. That was in 2009, as I was also going to college at the same time with my husband. Well, we weren't married then. We would get married later.
So wait, go back. When did you meet Chuck?
So I met Chuck. We have to think of this. 06-ish.
Okay.
06. I think, in 06, right. I met Chuck right prior to starting on with the Giese company.
And he was living in Dubuque or from Dubuque?
So he actually is from the Chicago suburbs of Orland Park.
Okay.
He was going to Loris at the time. We met on a blistery cold February day when there was an ice storm. I couldn't drive to Walmart, and they canceled all the classes. So we met on the wonderful social medias and hung out, and kind of that's how we've ever been since.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And so then eventually you decided, let's go get a house.
Yeah. So he had graduated from school for a couple of years. He was working on different things. I had, I felt like a steady income with the Gieses at that point because I'd been there almost 3 years.
Yeah.
I wanted to buy a house. And the funny thing with buying houses this is as the housing market is tanking. That whole bubble is about to burst.
Yeah.
In 08, late 08, into the whole 08, early 09. Because we bought it in late 08, but that's when we finalized everything, and then the bubble just burst. But you could look at houses that had been on the market for 6 to 8 months at this point. So think about that now. Like if you look at a house now, it's on the market and it's gone.
Yeah.
We literally had a stack of a 1/2 to 3/4 inches of like all those, like the things that you go to a realtor house, those of houses to choose from. And the house that we bought was the one that we had first initially looked at. It was out of our price range. We always wanted to never be house poor. That was the thing that Chuck and I have always agreed on financially. We've always wanted to be smart with our money. So we wanted to buy an old house that had good bones, but needed like some cosmetic stuff, like maybe painting or maybe a new bathroom or a kitchen at some point, and which we've subsequently done. We just wanted a nice old house because that's how we felt. We're upstairs, downstairs people. That's what we kept saying to ourselves. We don't want like a ranch. We don't want a split level. We don't want a townhouse. We don't want a condo. We want an upstairs, downstairs house with a yard and all that fun maintenance.
And it happened to be the first one you looked at.
It happened to be the first one we looked at, and we just instantly fell in love with it. And we compared every house to that house. And then we'd be like, oh, but it doesn't have this. And then the price just kept coming down. And we're like, we can afford this now. We're comfortable. It's under the dollar amount that we want to pay for it. We want to be under like 100,000. We thought buying a house over 100,000 was insane. I remember joking with our
you can find one for that now.
Yeah. That isn't, and really, ugh.
For good times.
Yeah. And so we were fortunate, and we didn't have a lot of debt in our life. We both our cars were paid for, so. It was nice. And so we bought the house. It was close to work, which was kind of one of our my requirements. Like, I want to be close to my work. And some days I wish I'm not that close, but I'm literally 5 blocks away.
Yep.
So it's nice. And so bought the house. Then she got involved in the neighborhood and stayed with Geezy's.
So now how did you become a city council person?
So that also ties into with the park then.
Yeah. Okay.
So when we first moved in, it was winter, and then in the spring somebody put up a sign on the fence for Comiskey Park that said neighborhood association meeting. And Chuck and I are both he went to school for political science, so I got to be more political because of him. But he's like, well, let's go to it. I'm like, yeah, let's go to it. And then we missed the date or something the first few times, and then eventually we started attending meetings. And in those,
this is the North End Association.
Yeah, so this would have been the North End Neighborhood Association, and mainly that time it was a lot of older neighbors that had lived in the neighborhood for years that were involved with the neighborhood association since its inception in like the 70s. I'm not exactly sure when, but it had been around for a long time. At that point, this is like 09, 010.
Yeah.
And they were excited to see young people that had moved into the neighborhood that literally lived across from the park. So we started getting involved with the neighborhood association. There you would meet usually a fire department, the police department, and Joyce Connors would come to all of our meetings. And then there was always a different city department person.
And who was Joyce? Third Ward?
So she was the third ward rep at the time.
Got it.
Mm-hmm. And so she would come and she'd tell us about what's going on in the city. Then there'd be a different city department manager would come and talk about like parks, trash, streets. The police department always talked. And I just kind of sat in the back with Chuck, and that's how Joyce introduced herself. And we would talk about like things, and I'd run an idea off her, and she's like, well, I'll get back to you next month. And that was our repertoire for a number of years. The other reason that I really wanted to get involved was spite and ego. Okay. And I'll explain why. And it has to do with the park.
Yeah.
We look at our house. I tell coworkers and some other people where I'm buying my house. And they're like, I don't think you should buy in that neighborhood. It's a bad neighborhood. There's needles in the park. And I'm like, I'm going to prove you wrong.
All right.
Working for Geezy's. I get done at 3:30 most days. Spring, summer comes along. I'm able to sit on my porch. I read a book. I get to know my neighbors. They pay attention to me. They're like, oh, you guys finally brought. They realize we've moved in. And so then they introduce myself. I talk I get to know my neighbors up and down the block. People, it's also, there's a lot of rentals, so people are coming and going. It doesn't bug me. I'm used to it. And I pay attention to what's going on in the park. Not having children, so I'm not like a creeper just staring at the kids in the park, but I pay attention to how the park is designed, with the playground equipment, with everybody being congested on this corner, right literally across from my house. So I'm used to hearing kids making noise, having fun. It doesn't bug me and Chuck. We love it because it's like we said, it's the sound of people. It's the vibrancy. It's this element. It's enjoyable. And I always have a manicured lawn across from my house.
Yep.
Doesn't bug me any. And then I start dispelling people's opinions of the neighborhood when I tell them where I bought a house.
Because that's not an uncommon thing. I've heard that as well, and it's been kind of embedded in our psyche. In fact, coming back to that, just to double down on that, when we purchased this building that we're in now, essentially rooted to, grow Callie's mission, and she fell in love with the building immediately. It hit exactly what she was after. But people in our close proximity were like, what are you thinking? That is an awful place. It's dangerous. I don't want her down there locking up at night. Do you have cameras? All the things. And so going into that, like you heard those same things about this neighbor. It was getting a bad rap that wasn't true.
It was getting a bad rap. I mean, and to dispel that, I would always ask the police officers, like, hey, does the crime that's going on in our neighborhood, is it equal to like what's going on everywhere else? And basically it is. I mean, people forget that, like, oh, there was a string of robberies for years up on Grandview. And it was just a bunch of dumb kids.
Yeah.
They were taking opportunity when people would get home from work. And, generally women or people, what's the first thing you do when you get home from work? Right when you walk in your kitchen door, off your garage, you just throw your purse down. You throw your wallet down. You throw your keys down. Where people were figuring that out and just taking them from people blind. And that was in the nice part of town. Crime happens everywhere in our community. It's the same everywhere, basically.
Yeah.
So it's just dispersed. So there's no concentration right in
So
the
then
north end.
how did you dispel this rumor? So
Basically that's what I'm
forever
forever just telling people. It's the same everywhere.
Yep.
It's the same everywhere. The problem with the perception goes back to the racism of the neighborhood.
Interesting.
The fact that you've got Comiskey Park, once again, it's almost like 3 acres at that time. It's also the only basketball court on the entire side of this town.
Interesting.
So when you look at all of our other public parks, and this is all before I become on city council, I start paying attention. I start looking at the similarities, because also what happens is when these kids are leaving late at night, they start talking of how far they got to walk. And windows open, kids are loud. Oh, I got to walk to 12th Street or 14th Street. So 24 to 12, you subtract the difference and do the math.
Yeah.
And then I start realizing that. And because of work, I'm forever on Google Maps or Google Earth, looking at aerial views, looking down at a property. I start pulling back. I'm like, there's no other basketball court. No wonder why these kids have to come here.
Interesting.
Prescott was the other one, but they locked because it's a school, they have the right to lock up their facilities.
Yep.
So they locked up their playground. So nobody's using Prescott. It is open off and on more often now, but that's an example of like if these kids wanted to do something, they all had to come here. The other problem is to play down there at the time, there's no seating whatsoever. There was no seating at all for anybody.
So it wasn't like a park you could just walk and go read a book.
You were just standing there. So you have all these people of color just kind of standing around watching their friends playing games, or they would eventually drag over a picnic table, and then they're sitting on that, and then people would drive by, and they would assume that they're doing something because they're standing around in a group, Kyle.
Interesting. How does that feel for you? I mean, you grew up in white Midwest America as a farm boy, so understanding there's a prejudice there.
As a gay guy too, in the early 2000s, it was a different world. Like, I'm like, eventually I'd like to talk about that too. About I pay attention to people. I listen to what people say. I listen to how they say things.
Yeah.
Words make a difference. And the words you choose to use, and when you choose to speak in a coded language, it's like, come on. I know what you're saying. You don't, or when you have to look over your shoulder mentality, or it's just like, it's frustrating. Some of that generation, as I like to also say, will have to move on to the next plane of their existence. And that's going to take a little bit longer. And I know our community, not growing up here, but there was things that happened in the 90s that I'm not responsible for.
Yeah.
But I don't want us to ever have a Dateline special that you can still Google about our community.
Interesting. And this is never, it's interesting to hear this come up, and this is not an intention, but, Enoch brought this up, which was, I mentioned to him in that podcast, I said, this makes me feel a little uncomfortable because he's speaking to this Dubuque's checkered racist past. And at first I was like, wait a second, because I was wanting to defend, that's not what I think or feel. But I had also just say, that's his experience. And it's challenging because I want to guard against that. I think most Dubuquers would want to, say, hey, we're woke, we're good, this isn't who we are.
Yeah.
But we do have that I don't know if it was 60 Minutes or Dateline, or there was some special where they talked about what was happening. So there was definitely a moment of fear that hit the national stage that put a kind of a checkered past, if you'd like to use his words. It spoke to that there was some racial tension in this town, and that there's ways to look back at that and see what happened when the projects were getting torn down in Chicago, and they're bringing, well, where do we go with all of these people who are concentrated here? And then a lot of folks came in. Our mayor at the time opened up Dubuque because I think we were probably wrestling out of that time of not having a population.
Yeah,
and
that was the other thing.
There were no black people in this community. Very, very few. The Suttons, I think it was a hard story for him. I mean, I'd love to talk to some of them as well.
Yeah, there's if you ever get a chance to talk to Lynn, I mean, she's got an interesting.
She's fantastic.
Got an interesting history of her whole family. There's discussions with and I can't speak to all of this. Is from what I've talking with the black community and a historian that kind of came through town one time talking about how Dubuque is so unique because of the fact that even though there's there was at one time 5 different railroad lines coming through here, and they've all sort of merged since then. A lot of folks in the black community, this is after the World War II, during civil rights movement era, were able to kind of move their families around by working for the railroad. They could work. They could literally move with the railroad, and so they worked for the railroads. And that's just that's a portion of of the little bit of our black history. So there were black people in our town. There's the city, and on my city stuff, I've learned about the little black pocket neighborhood that was around Hill Street, and I think going up 9th, it's like 8th Street. Okay. It's all been torn down when they redesigned that whole little mixed master intersection there, where you could either go up University and then go up Hill Street. There was houses there that were owned by black people that they're no longer there. But,
interesting.
Well,
I think
when I talk to the folks that are the older racist ones, it's a lot. What I've realized, it's a lot of. Well, just don't give them all the stuff, all the free programs. Some people still think there's billboards in Chicago. There are no billboards in Chicago.
Right. Come to Dubuque.
There never were billboards in Chicago, but that is a thing that sticks around that in certain people's minds, and it's like there are none, and you need to get that emotion out of your brain.
But you mentioned it. So being a gay man. You can understand and empathize or sympathize, empathetically the experience of being subjugated because that again, growing up in in the 90s to 2000s, you would use offensive terms, don't
people
be the
F
F word, is as bad as the N word in that regard.
And societies change, people's viewpoints change, and I'm glad that some people evolve and some people don't. At my stage in my life, I'm comfortable who I am, and people are going to be assholes regardless if they don't want to be assholes.
But do you
growing up, I
feel
paid
that?
attention to it.
In our community, do you feel accepted? And
Oh yeah. Oh, that's why we stay in this community.
yeah,
That's why my husband and I stay. We could have, after he graduated school and when I graduated school, we could have easily upped and moved to Chicago suburbs. We could have done that whole crazy commute thing. We could have lived anywhere in in the country.
yep.
Because I mean, yeah, my family's south of here. Chuck's is in the Chicago area, but we could have just upped and moved everywhere. We didn't own a house. We didn't have anything tying us to the community, but we wanted to be part of the community because I always felt that it was accepting to us.
Yeah.
And Chuck has always agreed with me on that. I could tell you, door knocking was interesting. I had one gentleman after I got elected called me up, and I had talked to him like 2 different times, given him my literature. And my literature was very just, this is who I am. This is about me. I didn't have a picture of Chuck. He's mentioned in it.
Yep.
My husband, Chuck. And I jokingly said to the guy, I said, did you never read my stuff? Because in the paper, so I get sworn in because my election was unique because Joyce had didn't want to run anymore. So she had got a different gal called Kate Larson.
Oh, yeah.
Kate ran for, and we helped her get elected.
Yep.
Because at that point, Chuck and I had been very involved in the neighborhood association. He was the president of it. He still is. And what happened, Kate, after a couple of years, her life changed. She didn't want to stay. And it was like, okay. And I decided to run. But because she left in the middle of her term, I was filling her vacancy.
Oh, okay.
So when I got sworn in November, like 7 days after the election, I went right to work. Like literally, like you're getting sworn in and now here's all this council stuff. So it's
So
like
you didn't have to run.
Oh, I still ran for office. No,
They had to elect you into
yeah.
that?
So I got elected in a special election. Big words today. In a special election, and I had a primary, and then the gentleman who ran against me. I successfully got the higher vote than he did, so I won. And then got sworn in and right to work. Where the other folks that were running in that election, they were going to be sworn in January.
Oh.
So since I've been on council, I have been working diligently. It's like boom, boom, boom.
I have a question. Is a city council person a paid position?
It is.
Good.
It's a whole $11,500 a year.
Oh, jeez. So it's like 50 cents an hour. Okay.
Yeah, some days, like this week, and I knew all this going into it because I say this week and next week is budget season.
Yep.
Is our like 2.5 weeks of budget meetings where we hear about all the fun departments. They tell us their budgets.
Yep.
They presentations that can be anywhere from a half an hour to 2 hours.
Yeah.
Last night we had a 2-hour discussion about housing. And it was a necessary discussion that we needed to have.
I want to go back because we skipped over it. So who is this gentleman that called you and what happened there?
Okay, so yeah, so
Sounds like
yeah.
you encountered
Thank
something
you.
difficult.
Sorry,
No, it's okay.
ADD. Some days. So he calls me up. So I get sworn in. The TH takes my picture with my husband standing next to me, and it says his husband. Well, they actually misspelled his name, but whatever. It says it's his husband, and this guy calls me up literally the next day, and because he saw it in the paper, he's like, "You son of a bitch! You didn't tell me you were gay." And I'm just like,
Changes everything.
yeah. And I'm like, Ron, I've
Damn
talked
Yankee.
to you 2 times at this point.
Yeah.
We talked like for an hour each time. It's
Great conversation.
yeah, and I knew you were a prickly guy, and you liked that I was honest with you. And I was like, but did you read the literature I ever gave you?
So that was one isolated event.
That
you
was
really
the one
had.
isolated event that I ever had.
Yep.
I never had like somebody.
And you're out
threaten
there.
me.
You're not.
Oh,
You're
yeah.
not. I drive by your house. You've got pride flags
Oh,
and the
yeah.
whole works.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's not like you're hiding something. You don't feel like you have to.
No, we didn't. I've never felt that.
To me, that actually feels really good.
Yeah.
To know that our community is not like filled with any sort of hate or and
I mean-
you're experiencing it and you're telling me that.
Yeah.
So.
The only thing I can speak to, like, so this last few years, so COVID happens, nothing really goes on. The world's kind of thawing out after that. And so 3 years ago, a small group of us decided we wanted to do something more for the community, like have like a nice pride celebration, which is what I'm really involved in,
Yeah.
which is coming up in June 1st. and it started as like, oh, we'll just do something inside. And we partnered heavily with the MFC because we wanted the MFC to be involved, because they were doing all this great programming, and we're still affiliated with the MFC. And that's a good relationship for us.
Yep.
There were other folks that did like a big pride celebration. They would leave town, and we were like, okay, well, I get it. But we didn't want to be that.
Nothing happened in Dubuque.
Yeah, so nothing was happening for about a couple of years, and COVID. And so then we decided, a small group of us wanted to do something. So we threw something together. And now it's morphing into this big street party.
Cool.
So that's what's coming up. But in doing that, we didn't have any issues. There was maybe one guy last year I remember was upset because he thought it was all paid for by the city of Dubuque. I said, no, we went fundraising. We went and talked to people. The money is sitting with the MFC because we wanted to have some oversight. We felt that it was good to have somebody else holding onto our funds.
Yep.
And they also partnered with us, and so but that's been a really interesting labor of love to try to throw a party together for the community and future generations, so they can feel warm and accepted and loving, and that our community like wants them to be a part of the community.
I mean, if you haven't heard it, thank you, because that's huge. Just to have a community of welcome and encouraging things that are like, you don't have to be fearful here in Dubuque. That's awesome. Yeah. That's awesome.
Like the only time I think that there was ever some weird prejudicey stuff, and I can't prove it, is so the yard signs are wired to my porch because people were taking them. Now, I don't know if they were taking them out of spite or because they just wanted them. I don't know. I like to say they wanted them. What story do you want to tell? Yeah. I like to say they wanted them. I never found them like ripped up or torn up. They just disappeared from my yard. And it's like, well, I can't keep. And we had
a lot of young kids who have their frontal cortex is not.
Frontal
lobe is not.
And they like wanted it. So
I was one of those kids.
I didn't care. So I don't care. It doesn't. But the one that started all was we wanted this. Basically, this would have been in 2000. I have to think back because it's been a snowball of funness of all kinds of things. 2021, yes, is when we first started with the yard signs that just said Dubuque Pride. That's all they said. They were just the rainbow with Dubuque Pride. That's it. And we were just selling. Chuck and I literally made a Facebook post. I think I bought like 200 of them, and then I just sold them for cost, and people could put them in their yard. And then I took all that money and then I gave it to the MFC. And then that's where the whole party idea morphed out of that. And so that's where, so eventually you'll see some more floating around town eventually. People will probably put them up in the month of June, which we greatly appreciate. So, yeah.
I think it's interesting to weigh in on this because this is a vulnerable conversation to have. And when you think of community, it's like, you want to have a diverse community. You don't have to agree. You might think, if you're really stuck on what your religious doctrine is or whatever, that homosexuality is the cardinal sin or whatever. It's one of these, you could, depending on how far on any spectrum you go, if you can just get aside from that to appreciate that this allows us to have a more balanced and colored community, and whether it's bringing people of color and different races, more ethnic speaking people into a community, it makes for a greater community. And I myself have struggled with, because you can, especially with social media, you can get pulled and really polarized in a direction. I think that's the fear of that, is that it makes it seem real that there are people who believe one specific thing and they've got your back, but they're really not, because they're not here out walking around in your community.
Yeah, you get what I like to call the social media bubble. Yep. You can just, and the algorithms, the way you can curtail depending on and it doesn't matter what platform you use, you can control what you like and dislike, and that little algorithm it'll feed you. It'll feed you what you want. Yep. It'll tell you it'll show you what you want to see if you just curtail it long enough, and people are really good at doing that, and so they can either collapse their bubble just around them about what they want to hear, or they can expand it, or they can have a bigger tent. If that's one, I've heard that before. about like everybody's welcome in the tent. And I'm not sure if that's a UCC or a, because I'm also a member of my church's First Congregational UCC.
Oh yeah, that was she just left here.
Lillian. We had Lillian Daniels.
Lillian Daniels, yeah. She wrote some great books too.
Yeah,
I got to know her briefly, and she's amazing. Yeah, so great church. I only attended there a few times, but it was like, what a really welcoming, fun, and just a fantastic place.
Yeah,
so.
and that the United Church of Christ is very opening and accepting of Chuck and me, and so we always knew that, and so that was what drew us into the church, and that's why we've been involved there since like 2011, and then we would get married in 2013 in the church.
Did you grow up with religion?
So I grew up in the Catholic Church because that was all that's available
same
in Bellevue. But I think
not
the Lutheran Church.
That was not welcoming.
No, that was not welcoming. And knowing that, and Chuck grew up in the Catholic Church, we both know that this is not a welcoming community that we want to be a part of. But we liked the rituals, the kind of the faith base.
Yep.
The UCC is more open and accepting, as well as like they want to give back to your community. They want you to be involved in your community, and that's been something that's been a big push in our church. Is like we're in the community. Unfortunately, we're in the middle of a massive remodel where we in 2019 discovered a structural problem, which we didn't think it would go this far, but it displaced us. We're using Steeple Square for the meantime, but we're hoping April-ish or May to be using our social room in the basement again, and then they can keep working upstairs in the sanctuary, and maybe sometime the end of summer be back in there. But
awesome.
But when you've had displaced from your home, I totally understand and can relate to like how a refugee feels, how somebody who's all of a sudden lost their home because of natural climate change, because of terrorism, because it's like you can't live here anymore. And that's literally what happened to us. We had a meeting, an engineer said, you should not be in this building anymore. You need to get out. And all of a sudden we're displaced. And then COVID, where we're no longer seeing each other, we're meeting online, and it's been hard. Faith communities have had a real tough time.
Yeah, it's an interesting. I think that just religious, faith-based communities and different things. I hear a lot about this in different rooms, but like, I won't knock the Catholic Church at all because I grew up in the Catholic faith, and I don't not subscribe. I think that it's made it very challenging for people. It's felt punitive, and I don't know if this has become a religious talk, but it's interesting how that the more you can be welcoming, the more you can really open conversations, open doors, and things like that. So I think you've done that.
Thank you.
In our community, just being open and vocal, and you're also a great listener. You understand how you just have to hear different viewpoints. I think you've sat in places where you don't agree with people, especially being a council person.
Oh, yeah.
What's that like being on the city council? Whether it's because I've watched. I mean, I don't think everyone tunes in every night.
No,
you don't have a huge.
They're sometimes riveting.
Yeah.
A lot of folks when they come to us, they're
have a
very
problem.
upset.
Yep.
With the problem. They don't know who to approach. They don't know how to fix it. They don't know. They're like at their wits' end mentality.
Yeah.
And so when a person calls me, when a neighbor calls me about a problem, I usually like to say, okay, well, why don't I come meet you? Why don't I come see the problem that you're having? And that goes back to construction. It's like, well, you can talk to me on the phone about your problem, but until I physically see it, I don't know how to fix it.
Yeah.
You can send me pictures, and that's helpful, but I like to see it firsthand. So that would be something that, a neighbor calls me up about something, and I go and meet with them, and we discuss things. Some issues are resolvable. Some of them are neighbor disputes that they just don't like their neighbors, and it's like, well, and your neighbor doesn't like you, and so they've turned into an unusual banter between each other where they're trying to drag me in a situation that's like, I can't help you.
Not a city problem.
This is a you two problem that you just need to learn to get along with each other. And I'm sorry you've had 20 years of hating each other, and it's like there ain't no way we're solving this War of the Roses today. So that can be interesting, and so I get more out of actually meeting a person.
Yep.
The council meetings but it takes a lot to come to council. There is a psychological semi-barrier where we're literally physically separated from people.
Yeah.
And I don't like that. I wish there was a way that we could somehow make it easier for people to feel comfortable coming to us, because it's like we're all up there where we look like not quite 12 angry men, but
and women, yeah.
Yeah, because it's it was. I found out the history of the federal building that used to be a courtroom.
It seems almost like that.
And it's like, okay, I get it. I just don't like it. But they used to meet in the library years ago. Prior to that, but anyways, so a person's got to come to us. There's a procedure that can be challenging of itself. Like I have to explain to people how the procedure is. Like, you need to come up at this point. Like, this is the only time you can come up and talk. I'm sorry.
Public comment, yeah.
During public comment or about the issue. And like, this is the only time you can come up and speak, And they're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. I said, I know. I hate the Robert's Rules of Law, but that's the rules.
That's what keeps things moving.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to have some sense of a boundary and order.
Yeah. And there are folks that don't like boundary and order.
I'm one of them.
There are days where it's like, Argh. So a citizen comes to us. They've got a real problem that they want resolved. Like the gal, like Kathy, who came down to complain, she's been talking to me for 6 months about that whole H&W building. She literally lives across from it. She has literally been looking at this thing for nearly 50 years.
Falling apart.
Yeah. So she has, and the fact that, there's hope of something happening, and taking away that hope is not cool. It is not acceptable, in my opinion. And so she's struggled a lot. And she basically said to it herself, well, I'm sorry to be a bitch. And it's like, no, you're being honest.
Yeah.
And she had every right to come and talk to us. And that's what we need to hear from time to time. And I have no problem with folks calling at me, yelling at me.
So being on council, though, like, do you feel like there's, I don't know, I'm looking back at the years. I feel like coming from a small community, my mom was the first female council person in Lansing, Iowa.
Okay.
Like, interesting backstory there. But do you feel like there's less engagement amongst, I feel like my generation is less engaged. Let them figure that out. They're the public heads. We're not getting as involved in local government and decision making as I think our past generations where there was more connectedness.
Definitely. Like, if you pay attention to any social movement groups, like political groups, there's the, what I call it. I go to a lot of political things with my husband, and we're there, and we sometimes have a running joke. I'll be like, well, we just brought down the medium age number a little bit.
So there's a huge missing gap here. Yeah.
As you and I are basically the elder millennials, as I call ourselves. Gen X is just starting to pay attention, and I think it's only because they're approaching their retirement years and they're concerned that their elders are, I don't know, it's interesting. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of the boomers are still involved, the ones that can be.
Yep.
And there's some Gen Xers. There's not a lot of millennials unless you're the end of the millennials. I've noticed there's definitely, and it probably has to do with family dynamics. So if you're in your 40s or you're approaching your 40s, you are involved with your kids at that point, or you have kids and you can't pay attention to local things.
I mean, that's politics in general. It seems to be, because as you get to that point in your life, you start to care more about what these things are. I know well, that's a whole nother time and a topic to talk about that. How do you involve? We have the tool, we have the social media tools, and it's great that our city broadcast meetings. I get notices. I'm like, that's great. I'm gonna log in. I'll just listen in, through Facebook, even like the city council meeting. It's great to hear in some of that. But how do you get people more involved? Because that directly relates to how strong a community is if people are actually involved and participating.
So I use social media. That's one way that I like, hey, this is what's going on in the neighborhood. This is who's doing what.
Yeah.
There's these budget meetings coming up. And sometimes I get feedback. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes people reach out to me. Sometimes they don't. Yeah. I do have people who do reach out to me through social media, which is nice, or emails or calls. But that's why I go to so many things. It's like I have to. You got to tell me what the problems are, and if I'm not out at like I enjoy going to farmers market. I enjoy going to like the National Night Out's a nice one because it's right across from my house. But when they do like music on Main Street, the festivals, like there's a lot of them. And I'm not like a big drinker. I'll like have one because I don't like having a hangover anymore. But it's trying to go out there to all the things, to talk to people. The fact that I've been in the paper enough, that my picture's been out there enough, people recognize me. That's a fun story to have. Long and short is, in my community that I grew up in, like I said, we're farmers, so we're not really involved in the city. And I wasn't like involved in politics in Bellevue growing up or anything, or even high school. My folks have 2 farms, one that's south of the Bellevue, and then they got one north of town recently. And this was an aunt of my father's. So my brother also farms with them part-time as well. He's a vet. So he's a busy guy too. So he's driving through town with a big piece of equipment, and somebody's like trying to pass him, but it didn't work. And she ends up kind of hitting a car across the street. And because she thought she could pass us my brother, like, I can't remember if he had a combine or a chisel plow on a tractor going through Bellevue to the next place. And she ends up, the running joke becomes is, well, I know it was one of the Sprank boys, but it's not the guy who's it's the one that's not the mayor of Dubuque. Because she's like, you're in the paper, because this guy's in the paper all the time, but he's not the mayor of Dubuque. So that's kind of my running joke.
It's funny.
With my
You're identified with that.
I'm not the mayor of Dubuque, which is okay by me.
We're killing our time here. We could talk for ages.
We could.
And we're probably not on full track. I want to go back. I know we're into the outro portion of this, but what are your dreams for yourself? Your personal dreams for what you're up to? Give us a glimpse into what you think your future holds.
Well, I enjoy my involvement with the city, but I also know I'm a firm believer in, I don't believe in political dynasties. I don't want to be on city council forever. I'd like to probably run one more time, maybe 2 more, and that would be it. And then somebody else can come over. I can be involved in all kinds of other ways. Between like, there's all kinds of volunteer things that I enjoy doing. I help out with the labor harvest. That's a huge labor where it's literally just giving food out to people. Then there's more components with that I enjoy. There's union work I can be involved with, political, other groups that are local. So I enjoy it. I have the time to do it as well. No kids gives me a lot more time than other folks. My employer being nice and flexible, like here we are in the middle of the morning. I gotta go to this interview. They're like, you're good. But I'll be fine, So I don't know. I would definitely like to stay in our community as long as I can, as long as the community will have me. But like I said, I don't need to be in political office forever. There are other people who should come and voice their stuff. There should be a changing of the guard.
Yeah.
Whether it's somebody that's in their 30s, great. Come on. I don't know, but I just don't think people totally are aware of the amount of time.
Were you the youngest person?
I was not. I was the second youngest.
Okay, I was going to ask
Kate Larson was a little bit younger than me when she got elected.
Interesting.
So yeah. But yeah, I enjoy a lot of and a lot of it is seeing what we can do with our community. So we didn't really talk about Central, but we need
to get into that.
I want to talk about it. I mean, that's going to be a 10-year investment.
Is that a dream of yours to be involved in seeing that transform?
Seeing that transform will be gorgeous. I mean, to watch the bee branch from literally my porch get started and dug out of the ground and then do what it is it's been phenomenal.
It's one of the most incredible parks that we have in Dubuque, and
it's a huge public works thing that has not happened since like the Depression era.
Yeah.
When you really think about it, the monumental transformation of an entire neighborhood that now we no longer have water in our basement, and we were one of those houses that had water in the basement. Oh yeah.
I remember years ago meeting Steve Brown and Darren Meering and the team at the engineering department, Gus, and they were all like, focused on this big thing that had to happen, which is opening up this underground thing. So it had flexibility and just, I think the work that they did on that, but I got involved with the deconstruction and, creating a plan for how I inventoried every house that was going to be torn down.
Really?
And then I ended up bidding on them, which seems a little unfair now that I look at it. But it was but now seeing it, like doing it then, you're like told it's going to be this thing. But now, like grabbing the bikes and riding with my daughter up and down the Bee Branch, it's phenomenal. And people are using it. It's created outdoor exercise. It's created a ton of opportunity.
With Kaylee's had a piano down there.
Yep.
You know, I mean, yeah, it's just, it's so amazing. And so like when you guys talked about you wanted to do something, I was like, yes, we need to support you. I mean, I hadn't taken piano lessons in 5 years, and now I'm taking lessons again here.
With Danny?
Yeah,
So
with
am I.
Danny. So it's like I needed to do this, and it's relaxing, and I enjoy it. He's very flexible with my insane schedule, and I thank you, Danny. But it's important to Central could be something beautiful.
Well, it already is. I mean, that's the narrative that has to change. It's already an amazing piece that we have in our community. It's not trying to gentrify it or completely transform it, but there's a lot of vacancy. There's a lot of blank space, and it's not being filled.
Yes.
And people are fearful of that. But I think, we've been tasked with some of that. And it's exciting. I think it's already pouring into this, coming back into this podcast. It's an opportunity to vocally, bring light to it. But there's really great things happening on it. And we've had some really great investment, and then some strongholds of people who've been there through thick and thin through the entirety of it. And it's like you want to make them feel validated in being there and not. It's a bit of a tricky dance,
Well, and the fact of my construction background, helping people with their roofs in general,
huge.
The complexity of just putting stuff on a big roof with all these wires in the alley.
Yep.
The alleys.
You just did a new. I just saw you guys did a roof.
Yep.
Even almost winter still. It was in February.
Yeah, we were putzing with that one.
What was that? That's owned by RRS.
You're talking about
Terry Mosina bought it once, and then they sold it.
So he sold
the
it.
old bar.
Yeah, it's the old bar. We did that one, and then he's doing and then he's redoing. Well, right now we're redoing 1706 with Chris Richards.
Yep,
we're down there. But before that, we just redid the Fudgers. I'm drawing a blank on his bar name now. Also on the 1700 block.
But that's where it starts. I mean, the roof is the most important part of a building.
But what I'm trying to get at is prior to the city having jurisdiction over Central, we couldn't do anything. Like you couldn't put a crane, a lift, anything because it was Highway 52. Because the DOT would be like, you have to sacrifice a goat to a volcano to before I'm going to ever let you shut down this street or even divert a lane.
Yep.
It was huge.
So that's big.
So the fact that the city now has jurisdiction over this is contractors, masons, all kinds of people can start reinvesting in these buildings because people just couldn't. They had no way to get stuff into the building. You just
additionally, and to defend it, like there's now a way around. There's the arterial, which allows a little longer, but allows traffic around. So there's some alternative routes that have opened up, which for the most important, John Deere. I mean, we watch. We're up on 24th, but we watch. I don't know. 100 skid loaders and pieces of equipment go by our front window every day down Central. And that's, a massive thoroughfare for them to deliver their product, and it keeps them going. So, and that's a huge employer in Dubuque.
Of course, they're a huge employer of the county and everything, and they do great stuff. It's just, we just wish my saying is if you just don't have to go through town,
I know.
Don't, but I get it.
I've also tuck pointed, all the basements of this area because it rattled from all that weight. So I think we got to move to closing this conversation. I think we could talk at length for hours.
We could have a follow-up.
That's the whole point. So if you tuned in for this entire thing, thank you. And thank you for coming out.
Thank you.
I think you're doing amazing work and just being a light in the North End and being so involved in all of these things, being someone who's approachable as a council person, which I think all of our council members are incredibly approachable. Even though, like you said, in the quarters, it doesn't feel that way because you're up on this pedestal that's, very judicial feeling. But I think that you've broken the mold for that, and that's cool. And we hope you continue to serve and enliven our community.
Well, like I said, I know in 2025 is the end of 2025 is my next election. I will intend to run. If citizens decide they don't want me, okay, I'm not upset. I mean, that is how the world works, and I know if somebody's got a better idea than me, okay. I always want to hear from folks though, because I get most of my ideas from my citizens. When they come and bring something to me, I can then, okay, let's work with that. How can we workshop that and make it better for our neighborhood and for everybody else?